So today I am back with part two of how I'm experimenting with using opaque acrylic paints versus transparent acrylic paints on the gel plate. So if you missed part one, I'll drop the link below in the description. And last week what we did is a little kind of activity where you can experiment with overlapping different transparent paints and opaque paints to compare them to see how they respond. So that gives you a basis to form when you're developing an idea for a print. But today in part two, I am going to guide you through this process where I have created a 4-layered one-pull gel print, and I'm going to talk you through my decision making as to when I'm using opaque paints and transparent paints as I layer to create this one-pull print. So if this is something you've enjoyed, please like and subscribe to my channel and drop me a comment below if you've enjoyed it, any comments, if you've got any questions, I'm here to help. And also I'll drop some links into the description for my newsletter and my new online course, Pushing the Boundaries, which is all about taking all my videos that I've put on YouTube and how I elevate those to the next level, combining techniques and pushing those boundaries to create frame-worthy prints. So if that's something you're interested in, I'll pop the link below as well for you to sign up to the waitlist. But for today, let's get started. Okay, so this is part two, and I'm going to create a 4-layered print, and I'm going to talk to you about my choices of paints that I'm using, when and where and how, and whether I've chosen to use an opaque or a transparent paint in the layering process and why. So firstly, I'm going to use this print that I've done previously as my inspiration for my colour palette. So I have got Paynes Grey in opaque. I have got Crimson in a transparent, and I have got Phthalo Turquoise, which is a transparent. And finally, I'm going to pull my print using a neutral grey that's in the opaque. Now, the reason I've chosen those 4 colours is because I quite like the way the colours, where the transparents overlay and the colour combinations I'm going to get. So like I said in my earlier video, it's well worth making a note of the colours that you use, the order that you lay them down in, and keeping a record of it so you can always come back to it and develop it and see what colour palettes worked for you and what didn't. So what I do is I just make a note of what colours, and I actually do it on the back of the print, so I know what colours I've used and in what order. So I decided to stick with the circle theme, so I found a stencil with circles. That's my Yupo Paper mask from last week. I've got a pill packet with different size circles on and the centre of a finished roll of masking tape. I'm going to be using a sponge applicator and my brayer to apply the paint. So I've got my 8x10 gel plate on a piece of Perspex, and this is a really good kind of tool to use so I can keep flipping it over to see how my layers are building as we progress. So I'm building on what I learned from last week, so I'm starting off with applying a small amount of the Paynes Grey in the opaque. So again, we discovered that just because paints say they're opaque, not all colours will completely block out other colours, and you find it's only the really darker shades that kind of give you that opaque when you are using very thin layers like we are on the gel plate. So that's my reasoning for starting with the Paynes Grey. I'm starting with my darkest colour first because I want this to be the prominent first layer that you see of the print. So you can see now I'm taking the pill packet and I'm just pressing that in to the wet paint to make those marks and patterns on the gel plate. So I've now added some of the Paynes Grey to the empty masking tape tube, and I am just using this to stamp onto my gel plate. Now you can see I tend to work in threes, and that's my way of building a balanced composition and where I'm going to get nice colour distribution. And I'm also kind of using that working in threes but placing them down to almost form like irregular triangles to help me with that composition and balance. So patience is really key with this process. So you must let this dry in between. So I've got my air conditioning cranked up to the max with heat, so it's drying almost instantly when I put the paint on the plate. But you do need to let each layer dry, because obviously if that paint was wet underneath the stencil would lift the paint off. And you can see I'm just laying that stencil down and using my sponge applicator to add some of those more dense circles. So I'm applying a little bit more paint, a little bit thicker. So there's a bit more contrast in the Paynes Grey as well. So you can see I'm applying the stencil for the third time. Again, working in threes to create that balance in composition and colour across my gel plate. So you now need to let this completely dry before moving on to your next colour. So I'm just taking this opportunity while it's drying. I was a little bit kind of missed some of the circles and got some part circles and it looks a bit messy. So I'm just using a baby wipe to touch up those areas to remove any marks that I'm not completely happy with. So I'm now flipping over the Perspex so I can see how that's starting to look. So I'm now taking my mask that were created from Yupo Paper last week, and I'm just lining this in the centre of where I've put those masking tape tube circles, and I am using my transparent crimson paint for this layer, and I'm just using my brayer to roll out a nice even thin coat of paint in the centre of those Paynes Grey circles. I'm peeling back the mask and then allowing that circle to dry. And I'm just going to repeat that for those other two circles that I've got on my gel plate. Again, thinking about working in threes. So I've then got those three crimson circles that are going to create that balance across my gel plate. Again, the key to this is thin layers of paint. If you're applying really thick layers of paint on each layer, it's going to make it much harder to pull the final print. And second, you are going to be waiting a long time for it to dry in between. So I like those large circles of colour, but now what I need to do is introduce a little bit more of the crimson colour, and I am just applying a small amount of paint to that pill packet that I can use then to stamp to create, so there's a bit more of that crimson colour around my gel plate to complete the composition. I'm using both sides of the pill packet to create different marks. So the side I'm using now gives me a much bolder with an outline of a circle, where using the opposite side just gives me almost like little circular line works that are irregular where the pill packet has been crushed, and I really like those marks too. And you can see I'm working in threes again. So I've got 3 using the back of the pill packet. That creates a bit more of a defined shape. And now I'm going in with the other side of the pill packet. That just gives me some of those broken circular lines. Flipping the plate over so I can see how those layers are beginning to build and to give me an idea of what my final print is going to look like. So I've left this to dry for a good 5 minutes, and you can see I'm giving it a good rub over there to check it's not wet or damp in any place before going in with my transparent, again, Phthalo Turquoise. And you can see I've got that gap in the middle. I've been working in those threes and avoiding that gap in the middle. And this has kind of happened by accident, really. So I'm applying a layer of the Phthalo Turquoise in the centre, and I'm using that pill packet again to stamp that pattern in the centre of my gel plate. And I'm moving it round just to soften those edges where I've applied the paint. So far I've got my first layer of Paynes Grey, and then I've got transparent crimson and transparent Phthalo Turquoise. And that's normally kind of my go-to sandwich, so to speak. I start off with quite a bold opaque paint, and then I layer some transparents in the middle that I know are going to overlay and work nice together. So where that Phthalo green overlays with the crimson, I'm going to get like a darker purpley kind of tone that it's going to create. So that is my kind of process of working. Again, flipping the plate over to help me decide what I do next. So I've got that Phthalo Turquoise in the middle, and I need to now balance that out. So I'm going to apply some more of that paint across the gel plate in opposite corners to try and create some balance. So I'm now using the pill packet with the smaller circles just to add a little more, a different mark making really, just to give it a little bit more interest. So I'm now using that stencil again and the sponge applicator to apply some of those circles in the Phthalo Turquoise transparent paint. I thought I would add some circle detail inside of those big areas of the circles to provide a little bit more interest and break up those large areas of colour. I then decided I didn't like it, so I went back in with my pill packet and just stamped over it to try and kind of blend those two areas of colour together. And finally, I decided I just needed something in that bottom left-hand corner to try and balance that Phthalo Turquoise out a little bit. So again, I'm using my stencil and just overlapping it over those crimson circles. Okay, so I've let this fully dry again for about 5 to 10 minutes, and I am now going to apply my opaque paint in the neutral grey. And I am applying enough paint that I'm going to have a nice even coat of paint that's going to provide good coverage, but also that I'm just starting to see the layers popping through. So that's the kind of amount of paint you want to apply. So you can see I'm taking a little bit off on my roll off sheet to the side of me until I've got that nice smooth even coat. So while this paint is still wet, I'm going to lay down my cartridge paper So this is just a piece of paper out of a sketchbook and it's 160 GSM. I'm giving it a good rub to make good contact, and then I'm going to leave this on the plate for a good half an hour. So I'm now going to remove the gel plate from the Perspex. And I'm going to start by going all the way around the edges and just releasing that gel plate from the paper. I find this helps to make sure that I get a nice crisp pull, because it's often where the dried paint accumulates around the edges of the gel plate that then causes tears as I pull the print. And I'm pulling the gel plate away from the paper rather than the paper from the gel plate. And there we have it, our final print. I always find that placing a mount around the print helps me look at the final composition to check I'm happy with it. And there's just some close-ups of how the layers and the opaque and the transparent colours have kind of overlaid to give those different kind of mark making and colour combinations. Hope you found this video helpful and gives you a little bit more confidence when to choose an opaque versus a transparent acrylic paint.